Hello, dear audience. We are going to continue our conversation discussing Mother Teresa's words about sacrifice, about silence, prayer, faith, love, and action at the end. Last time we spoke about the fruit of prayer is faith. We discussed a few nuances about faith, about the fruit that we give, about the prayer that results faith in our lives. And today we are going to go to the next line, which says the fruit of faith is love. We mainly concentrated on the fruit and the fruits of our lives in the previous episode. And today we are going to touch this one line a little bit again and go to the next line, which says the fruit of faith is love. And we are honored to have Presbyteria with us to guide us through this conversation. Our modern life is full of fearful threats. Some of them are explanations that people give us that if human beings don't become better, it will be their end. This kind of associates with what Christ says in very few places in the New Testament. One about a tree, that if the tree does not give fruit, the axe is on the roots of the tree, and if it doesn't bring fruit, it will be cut. So this is kind of similar what's going on today, but we can also say that the Bible and the religion has been used throughout the centuries to keep people in fear or to serve their purposes. And there are many occasions like this today that this kind of lines are used. What is your approach to this kind of negative understanding and explanation of these lines or similar lines?
In our previous episode, the theme was from the verse of Mother Teresa's prayer, the fruit of prayer is faith. And we spent a lot of time talking about what does fruit mean? What can we learn from that concept? Why would she be repeating fruit, fruit, fruit several times in a prayer? And also the rest of that verse that says the fruit of prayer is faith. And hopefully we're also transitioning to the next line in this episode that the prayer says the fruit of faith is love. And so in a way, how you're beginning is a good bridge from one to the other, because it talks about false witness and what's real witness. And you quoted from the scriptures that are very striking about the dead wood will be cut away, basically, for those that are not bearing fruit. You were saying just now, and even more during the break, that there are people out there within the church. I'm thinking, you're thinking outside the church, I'm thinking both. There are people within the church and outside the church that are using fear and intimidation to try to gather people together, to try to control people, to try to shame people or corral people into a certain way of being or behavior. And I'm not saying that there aren't things to be afraid of. I am wondering what the motivation is of the person giving that kind of lesson or using that kind of tool too heavy-handedly. Are they being motivated by love, or are they being motivated by control? If the issue is to control, then what do they place their faith in? What do they place their trust in?
My concern is the same that you mentioned about what's their motivation. And now I can see clearly in these two lines that, yes, we're talking about the fruit. The fruit is important. But if we don't lead our steps towards love, or we don't lead people's steps towards love, then we obviously have a second gain from it. I just would like to know, why did Christ use such expression?
The Lord, toward the end of his ministry, looking down at Jerusalem, and he's just shaking his head and he's saying, "Oh, woe, Jerusalem. I wish I could be like a hen gathering her chicks to gather you and embrace you." That scene connotes to me that he sees what's happening in the cities, perhaps, of his time, and perhaps even more, sees through time to our day what is happening in our cities and how we are divided and how we are scattered, and listening to in almost every other voice at times rather than the loving God. And so Jesus is aching with love, aching with concern for his chicks, so to speak, as the mother hen. And so there is a time to talk in ways that, yes, this is scary. If you read that passage, it's scary, because what are the consequences when we are not listening to the law of love? What happens to us? What happens to our relationships? There are consequences for which that will be paid. When we read in the scriptures about the dead wood being cut away and cast into the fire, I think many of us look at that as, okay, people will be judged and thrown to hell. I'm not going to retract that. That's a possibility. But we need to look at that passage and similar passages with an even deeper penetrating heart and mind. That if nothing, not even one iota, as the scripture says, which is the Greek word for the letter iota, which means in the alphabet of life, not one little letter, not one little dot on the letter is going to escape the truth of love. That however God's love and justice will deal with all of us at the end time, we believe that Jesus will return at some point. When, we don't know. It's good to be awake and aware every day and every minute of our lives. But that the world will be at one point brought back to Him, changed and transfigured. And every bad thing will be cut away. There will be no evil in the kingdom. There will be not one iota of bad or dead wood. And so it's important to pay attention to these, but in the terms of the gift of love that is being given to us, not crouching in fear by someone's intimidating messages. There are people out there, maybe within the church, but plenty outside the church, that are trying to intimidate people into coming to their camp because of the carelessness of this world. They might have an honest observation that we are fretting our lives away, at the same time using that in a kind of mind control to do what they want with their new followers. It's very, very, very dangerous. The intention is not love. The intention is self-seeking, which is the exact opposite of love. Authentic love, agape love, is always sacrificial, is always self-offering.
What kind of sacrifice does God expect from us in the light of this line? The fruit of faith is love.
That's unique to each one of us. One of my favorite new sayings that I think we've shared here in the past, and I share with my friends, is we need to hang on the right cross. We each have a life that's been given to us as a gift. We each have gifts given to us that God plants in our hearts like seeds, that as we cultivate the soil of our hearts and our lives and our relationships, those seeds will grow and bear fruit. We don't know what that is. We might have a sense because they're growing from inside us, but we don't know what they all are. It's kind of like those, like I said the last time, like those gifts in the Cracker Jack box. You don't know. You've got to dig and do the work to find it, and oh, there it is. And God is a great God. There's more than one gift that He's given us. And so, okay, but it's still all kind of a surprise, and being humble to show up to see what we've been given by the loving God. We all have crosses to bear in our everyday lives, and we all have challenges to face. Some of the challenges we face are true for us in the context in which we live. Other challenges can be a waste of time. That's the wrong cross to hang on. Hanging on the right cross, making the sacrifices that oblige us to engage the truth of our lives, the truth in our lives, a minute at a time, in a way that takes courage for us to be true to ourselves in the presence of God in those situations. It takes courage. No one is in our shoes. Only we can fill our own shoes. And so the answer for Kyriaki is going to be Kyriaki's answer in the presence of God, hopefully supported by the people who love her. The answer for Arkady is going to be Arkady's answer in the presence of God, hopefully supported by the people who love him. And so all of our answers are going to be a little bit different. And so because of that, it's a kind of suffering, never been done before, and never will be done exactly in the same way, because our lives are unique in the presence of God. It's always in the presence of God, otherwise it's narcissistic. Our working in this way at times will hurt because it's a little lonely. At the same time, when we make that offering, there will be fruit. There'll be people who appreciate it. There will be situations that some good will occur to as a result of our making these choices. These are little indicators that more life is being made manifest as a result of us showing up for our lives, us showing up for the crosses we've been asked to carry by God, the real cross, or the real crosses, and seeing what happens as we go forward.
When we speak about the wrong cross, we also can refer this cross to the prayer, the faith, and love, and we can be mistaken in any of those. In our prayers,
right,
in our faith,
right,
and in our love. We can pray to ourselves. There are different ways of meditation out there that concentrate on the person, on yourself. And there is faith. We believe in many things. We believe in our jobs, we believe in our society or in the country that we live. We believe in ourselves. We trust ourselves, our strengths, and our success in the world. And love can be also, like Jesus says, you may love your friends and your relatives, but everybody that does that. You have to love your enemies. Now they say that nobody since then has been able to do that, to love the enemies. But who knows, maybe there has been some people who have reached to the expectations of Christ. What's his expectation from us? To be able to love our enemies.
Maybe for our discussion right now, this minute, it might be good to think about Mother Teresa, because she's the author of this prayer, and that she shares it with people who want to get to know her. In a sense, she's sharing her life in the presence of God with the people that reach out to her through this prayer. And so for her, this teaching that the fruit of prayer is faith and the fruit of faith is love, that yes, you're right, the fruits of false prayer we've seen. We talked about the publican and the Pharisee earlier in this episode and the previous episode. The fruit of false faith is where he had faith in himself. Or another story that Jesus talked about the rich man who had a great harvest, and the harvest was so big, he ordered a bigger barn to be built, and he was talking to himself, soul, eat, drink, and be merry. He was like praying to himself. Time to celebrate, party time, basically, is what he was saying. And Jesus said, what a fool you are. Tonight your soul is required of you, old Mr. Party Boy, and girls who go that direction. But that he placed his faith, he placed that which he believed in, that he placed the trust of his life in his things, in his toys, in how good he looked, in his richness. Got him nowhere as a person, dead end. And I'm sure there are false loves out there that are self-seeking, that somehow manipulate other people, that control other people, and rather than give life wherever relationships occur, where life is sucked out of the situation because of the self-centeredness of particular parties that don't really love authentically, their experience of the other, their connecting with others is based out of self-centeredness, and it's all about them, and others are just objects to use. And so those are bad fruits of prayer, bad fruits of faith, bad fruits of love. But Mother Teresa, think about her. If we just think about her, the fruits of her prayer gave life. The fruits of her prayer led her from a cloistered monastic community with one group of sisters to a call within a call, she said, at one point in her life as an adult. And that led her to the streets of Calcutta and other parts of India, seeking the dead, or the virtual dead, among the dead, people who were thrown in garbage piles, as if they were nothing but garbage, and try to give them a dignified end, and if possible offer healing, but oftentimes just to give them a dignified end, and to place her faith in something that never existed before, a way of reaching out to others where the whole culture looked at her not only in a neutral way, but was like a weight against her, got in her way, sort of impeded her work. It took amazing faith, amazing trust in God, so that she could reach out to others in love, in that self-sacrificing, self-offering love, to see the other person as Christ himself. And she did not say that as pious words, but that she really encountered every man, every woman, no matter what condition in which she found them, as the Lord himself, and attend to that person in the same manner. This is not a small thing. And so what would it be like for us to imagine each person whose path crosses us as another Christ?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have to be careful, because not everybody out there has honorable intentions. And I'm just thinking of a bad situation that I just learned of the past day or two in my own family, where somebody with great violence and malevolence moved into a family member's neighborhood, and this person is a very dangerous person. And I've been thinking, how, as a Christian, am I to think about this person who was actually posturing me when I was visiting this relative the other day? And I didn't realize this person was dangerous and had weapons who could hurt a lot of people. And so what is my stance to this person as another Christ? It's to at least have compassion and at the same time don't cross that person. With our eyes open, respecting that even that person is created in the image and likeness of God. And at a safe distance, at least for me today, to feel the grief for her devolution, her losing her humanity. This person is a woman, actually, is very dangerous and has weapons and has used them inappropriately. But even this person needs to be engaged with tender heart and with my eyes open. And we have to think of all the other, quote, regular people in our lives who are maybe easier in one way to engage because we know they're not carrying loaded weapons, but at the same time maybe inert toward us, maybe unresponsive toward us, or maybe just using us in ways that profit them. They too are created image and likeness of God. They too are an opportunity to love Christ. How? I don't know, but to even think about that, to take that seriously with every encounter that we can, changes us, opens us up, and maybe breaks our heart a little bit because of the pain, but in a way that forces us to turn our attention to God and trust Him.
You mentioned about Mother Teresa going and helping people who were near to death and believing in them. Or she had so much faith that she had to put into something that didn't exist. And that's why I think she probably needed so much prayer, and that kind of faith required prayer. Otherwise, it's impossible to believe in something that doesn't exist or is a non-existence for the rest of the world. So she had to pray and pray to be able to believe in something that doesn't exist. And then to be able to love. Once she found these people in the garbage piles and gave them some kind of life or some kind of dignity, then she could love them. Now, when you speak about a person who is dangerous, I saw in a newspaper yesterday that this man entered into pharmacy, a drugstore, didn't even give chance to anybody. Usually the thieves are looking for something, and that's what they're looking for. They don't want to hurt anybody. They go in, ask everybody to stay in their spots, they take whatever they need, and they leave. This person wanted something, but in addition, took something that he didn't need, these people's lives. There were 4 or 5 people in there. Now, when I was looking at the newspaper, I was looking at his face. They had a civilian camera picture of it. He looked like a rat to me. And I was thinking, where is God's image in this person? How deep has it been buried under the trash that he cannot even see it? He cannot even see in other people. Now, when Mother Teresa goes and rescues somebody from the trash pile, that's a physical trash. And that person can be a diamond in that trash. And you take him out, and that's it. You have a diamond. But with this kind of person, the trash is inside. You have to...
Covering up the image and likeness, that's right.
Yes, and it's even harder to find what is lost. In Mother Teresa's case, even she says, when she comes to New York City, she says there are more hungry people here than in Calcutta. Because she probably sees this kind of people who are buried under the trash and dead. In the previous episode, we were talking about the words that Christ used to direct his disciples, saying, "Let the dead bury their dead. You come follow me. I am the light, I am the life." Now, in Mother Teresa's case, these dead people were almost more alive than in a modern society. We see dead people or people who are buried under the trash in a different way. What would you...
Well, you're pointing to an important teaching that we don't often talk about as Christians. We don't even talk about it as often as we should in seminary. I remember way back when, my own spiritual father and professor in systematic theology, now Metropolitan Maximus of Pittsburgh, back then, Father Maximus Aguirre-Husius, who was our professor for many years, and other professors would talk about when we are not cultivating to grow in truth. Now, for you and me, truth is a person. And so as Christians, we would say growing in Christ. But even if people don't know Christ and are striving to grow in truth, because as I said, truth is a person, that affects their humanity. They become more and more human through the passage of time as they become more who they're called to be, as they strive somehow to live with integrity in this, growing in this direction. When, however, we look the other way and we serve other gods, and we get seduced by those gods after, and chase a false light, well, we don't get really fed very well by that false light. And so instead of, if I can use Darwinian language, evolving in a way that God has desired for us, we are devolving. It might feel like evolving also from that perch in life, but it's a devolving. We lose our humanity. And so when you said the guy looked like a rat, it's funny, I saw some of those same film clips, and what came to my mind was something very similar. He looks so dehumanized. He doesn't look human. He was so hardened. It looked like no remorse, and that hardened. And again, we don't know what's happening inside him, but just by looking on the outside, not out of the realm of possibility that for him, or at least other people like him, are, in a sense, devolving in a way that takes them away from being a true human being, which is a catastrophe.
The question is, why do we have this kind of people? And I have two approaches to this. One is us, the society creates them, and the other one is a little bit more mystical. Most of them, when they do something, later they say, I did not want to do it, or I didn't mean to do it, or I didn't do it. Even they, to the extreme, they will say, I didn't do it. It's obvious, everybody saw, everybody was witnessing that they did it, but they are saying that they didn't do it. And sometimes they're not trying to fool anybody, they can't, but they believe that they didn't do it. So there was something else that was leading them to do something, and after the act is done, they forget what they have done, because they were not actual force who was doing it, they were just a tool in something else's hands. So there are two approaches for me, that the society drives people over the edge and somebody just loses the control and does things like this, or becomes a drug user. And then once somebody is a drug user, needs the drugs, doesn't have money, has to do something about it. On the other side, there's this other force that may be affecting people and having them do things. Now, how much cultivation does this kind of person need? Can we or anybody as a servant of God say, Lord, give him another chance, I will help him, or I will put some fertilizer under this tree and that tree will bring some fruit. Maybe not oranges, but it will probably bring some sour apples. It's still a fruit. How much effort do we need? Now, you are a professional in this field. You have probably met people, similar people, who haven't killed somebody over the drugs, but they have killed themselves, maybe. And what's your approach about this?
Well, I think in a sense, everything you just said is true. That if the society were more loving, if the society, people in the society were more attentive, if we as human beings were more attentive to one another, I don't think we'd have half the problems we would have now, as opposed to how we're being seduced to all of these individualistic pleasures that, I'm not saying don't have recreation and pleasure, but when they take on a life of their own that cuts us off from our own humanity, and then seeing the humanity in our brothers and sisters, we leave one another in an abyss of non-love, of non-being. When we are loved, we experience our personhood, we experience a connection to our own selves. When we are not loved, and oftentimes that includes when we are being shamed or being abandoned, because abandonment is traumatic on the soul. And this is the recent research of trauma experts, that abandonment and neglect on the psyche of the human being is experienced as trauma. And maybe this is something our grandparents could have told us, those grandparents that were pretty sensitive to these issues, but now scientific research has been coming to the same conclusions. And so rather than be left in that abyss of non-existence, of being unseen, people will concentrate their efforts and find some way to go on apart from that, and so take on their own characteristics to survive that may or may not coincide with what more civil society has, and I put quotes around civil society, has to offer. So I think the nature and nurture issue that you're implying is very much active. So there's many layers here of activity going on. You also kind of talked a little bit about a mystical approach about what happens to people. You almost hinted, and you didn't use the word, but I'll say a word that came to my mind, almost like being possessed, in such denial of what they did that even if people around that person saw what he or she did, that person really gets so disconnected that they are denying what happened. And I'd say some of the time they're aware, and it's just they're trying to cover up the shame that they're feeling for that activity. I think for other people there is a situation where the dynamic of the addiction, the dynamic of the disease takes on a life of its own. So that with drugs or alcohol, people can be in an altered state, and it's called a blackout. That person we saw on the news, I think it's the same person, the same robbery that we talked about where there were several murders, he could have been in some kind of blackout, that he no longer has ethical control of his own actions. And this Mr. Hyde comes out that's really kind of a monster and has no conscience and gets what he wants and can murder people as if they're garbage, just walk over them like they're nothing. Because that was sort of the steely, dead look I saw, on my view, from watching that on the television. Can people be in an altered state without the drugs? You betcha. And so what takes over? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But it's an altered state with which they have some kind of participation that they can easily claim I don't have responsibility for, but they set their own selves up for that. And so these are all possibly happening some of the time in many places. And so it's important to keep our eyes on the prize, mm-hmm. to name the sin, name the evil, talk about it fully, to say the tragedy of it all, and to name whatever we can name, and then turn our backs to it and look to the solution, look to the Lord, keep our eyes on the prize, and walk in a way that would be a tonic, an antidote to that, not only to that, but to keep going where we need to be going with our lives.
I recently read a book called Men in Search of Meaning, and the author, who has been in a concentration camp, discusses the psychology of the human being in the camp. And one thing that took my attention is that he mentions that sometimes there were awards, which were cigarettes. And none of the prisoners used these cigarettes. They usually traded it for bread or for an extra meal they can have. But he says, when we saw somebody take out a cigarette from a shoe or from underneath the clothes and start smoking, we knew that the end of this person is very near, and they usually died within hours. He explains this. He says the meaning has a very essential place in survival. Those who still thought about something, for example, he brings an image of him thinking of his wife. He says, I don't know if she's alive or not, but I am conversing with her. I'm thinking of the good times we had together or the good times we may have later on. And he says that it kept me going because I had something to find meaning in. But this person who takes out the cigarette and starts smoking, he says that was the sign that this person has lost any meaning and gives into a kind of an addiction or self-satisfaction. This happens in a concentration camp when people are wiped off their dignity. They're not treated as human beings, they're treated like numbers. But this kind of thing happens in a society. Somebody goes into a drugstore and takes drugs and uses them. To avoid what? Why did this person lose the meaning? We can easily understand that person in the concentration camp, how that person lost the meaning, and we don't blame them for smoking and dying. But we see many smokers in our society today who don't even think about dying, but they're actually dying slowly, or speeding up their death.
And nicotine is what is often called out in the science world one of those designer drugs for the brain. And what does nicotine do? It calms you when you need to be calmed. It wakes you up when you need to be woken up. It comforts you when you need consolation. It numbs you when you need to be numbed. And so it's not a coincidence that if people avoided giving away the cigarettes so that they could change them for more life-giving things like food and drink and what have you, and resort the cigarettes for the ability to get through the hours, I would think, through consolation, through anesthesia, through whatever the designer drug nicotine in the tobacco does to the brain to help them get through those hours, it's really, really understandable. So I see that as a metaphor for the consolation of the meaninglessness of living in the intentional trying to break the human down context of the concentration camp. And then fast forward to today, where people might be smoking, and yes, the tobacco today is 10, 15 times perhaps more powerful than the tobacco of 40, 50 years ago. And that it's kind of a lesser issue compared to all the other ways people can be anesthetizing themselves or distracting themselves to death, quite frankly. And I think why my eyes at times wanted to tear up is because I could hear, as you were painting this picture, the lack of connection to meaning, that there was no orientation, at least with the persons you describe, of being connected to something greater than myself that gives life. Like you were saying, the author said he was thinking of his wife. I think he was also thinking about other things, but that's an example of enjoying life, going back to life with my wife, kept him going. The people that he saw starting to pick up smoking and would be dead within a few hours or days probably were just trying to numb the pain, numb the meaninglessness. I'm just wondering, we're surrounded, we're swimming in an ocean of distractions that directly or indirectly numb our awareness of the love of the living God, that numb our ability to turn that direction because we're so distracted. We don't even have the alphabet anymore of that need to be connected to something that gives meaning. And so I think that's why, and I said in the previous episode, how some of the more modern, more contemporary spiritual elders of our day in the Orthodox tradition are talking about a gentle stretching for the love of God, a gentle discipline of pushing, but make it gentle as we offer our love to God. Because the distractions of the world are so many, so numerous, and the clue is they're often very extreme. There's some kind of extreme going on, that the way to start putting our priorities in place is to turn our attention gently but with delicate but focused attention on the need to be connected to the other, capital O, the need to be growing in a relationship with a loving God who knows better than we do what we need and how to go about it. In relationship, we are often defined by the company we keep, by the relationships we have, from our birth through our childhood, and as we become older, where we have more say in our relationships, because we have no say in the families into which we're born, or the family in which we grow up. Sometimes we're adopted, sometimes we're in families where they break up. A lot of the time families break up. And so many things happen in childhood and early adolescence and mid-adolescence that are beyond our control regarding how our lives evolve. And even so, as we grow, there's choice. And even so, as we grow into adulthood and into early adulthood and middle adulthood, there's more and more choice about the company we keep. And from our earliest days through our oldest days, the company we keep does help fashion us, does help define us, how we define ourselves. Could I be looking for people's approval so much that I compromise that which I should be doing? If approval is an end in itself, that's an idol. Happy connections with people who love you, well, that's a desire for authentic relationship that's wired into all of us. So it's a very nuanced thing, as you were saying. We all need to be connecting with one another with love and growing and supporting one another. And at the same time, when we need to be doing things that are unique to us, to try to do those peacefully in a way that's authentic to us, as we risk maybe people understanding and supporting, and maybe people not understanding and not supporting. And that's a very, very hard thing to do. Within that whole range of relationship, in a good way, if they understand or not understand, support or not support, that helps define who we are. And that helps us realign in the presence of God more about our identity as unique persons created in the image and likeness of God. How does that happen? I don't know. But the mystery of you is ineffable, unrepeatable, unable to articulate. The mystery of me, the mystery of every person listening is ineffable, is unrepeatable. We can't describe that because it's unique to that person created by the love of God. And so how I am in relationship with others does impact me, who I am. And that's something important to bear in mind as we go about our day. Where do we spend our attention? How do we connect with people? If most of my time is spent in waste, I have to be careful I don't become like the waste I hang out with.
The way that you relate to the people very closely is connected to the way that you live. And if we go to the prayer, there are steps: prayer, faith, and then love, and then action, and it starts with sacrifice and silence, that fashion our lives, and according to which we can be relating to others. Now I remember Metropolitan Anthony again tells a story about a monk. This is in a speech where he speaks about the humanity, how we have to be human first. That's what he says. Christ came to this world. He came as a human being to restore our humanity, to become, the first we need to become human. And then he brings this example: how can we become human? If we can see the light of God in somebody's eyes, that's one of the ways to become human. And he brings an example of a monk whom he met when this monk was in his deathbed.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, when I went in, there was an amazing light coming out of his eyes. And when I went closer, he said, Your Eminence, I'm so happy you're here and I can share this with you, is that most of my life, the first part of it, I was in prison 5 years. I'm thankful to God for those 5 years that He gave me a chance to be alone by myself, with myself, and figure things out. And then 16 years following that, I was in a concentration camp. And I'm thankful to God to be there because I was a priest to these people. And I'm thankful to God that He chose me to be there because the free priests did not have access to these people. And I was chosen from the prison to be put in a place where nobody else could guide these prisoners. I think that my life has been meaningful. This has many faces. A person who can find meaning in a prison, in a concentration camp, and beyond that can give life and meaning to the others. And the other side of this is that we don't have concentration camps now, at least in our society here, but we have people who have lost the meaning in a free life. And in some respects, they are not reached. It's impossible to reach them. How can you reach them? Can you go to their house and say, you know what, you have lost the meaning. Let me tell you what the meaning is. No, that's not going to work.
In some ways, the example you're giving coincides beautifully with Mother Teresa's prayer and Mother Teresa's love that she exhibited to the people in Calcutta and elsewhere, where, just as the monk that you were saying in the story, in a concentration camp where there was no love for the prisoners, there was no light for those prisoners, and he, in a sense, worked against the culture that was like an anti-love, bringing love. It's very similar in some ways as what Mother Teresa did freely. She freely, in a culture of indifference. Now, indifference, when it's not life-giving, is antithetical to love. So in that heavy indifference of Indian society, to treat people with respect to see that they had dignity, to change her life and the lives of others, that they were worth changing their lives for, just to be with them during those last hours, days, weeks of their existence. And so in some ways, I think we too are called to look through the indifference. I think this society is indifferent to love. This society around us is indifferent to the love of God. And so that heavy weight that we are carrying all the time, that we don't feel because we've been carrying it for so long, which is a kind of enslavement, we need to look at. And right, it's all more powerful than we are, but anytime we make that turn and cultivate that longing, which is another way of looking at prayer, cultivate that longing for God, cultivating that longing for His love so that we can be held in it, which we always are, every moment of our existence, and to be vehicles to others for it, is something that conquers all, I think, only by the grace of God.
Thank you very much. There is always hope and love. And my understanding from this was that if we cultivate love in us through prayer and through faith, then the rest is up to God. All we can do is to have faith, to pray, to keep longing for Him and asking for love, and He will give us the love and we'll take care of the rest. Thank you very much, and thank you, dear audience, for being with us. And we'll meet you next time and we'll talk about the conclusion of the prayer. Have a good day. Thank you.